name is David Pereira. I'm the president and owner at GetLift agency. We are based in Toronto, although we have staff down in Austin, Texas as well. So yeah, Toronto representing here, and obviously Tyler as well. Our focus as an agency, we're B2B. We do a lot of the kind of the marketing foundations, so personas, messaging, the stuff that you need before you really should be doing anything else. We do a lot of content marketing, so developing all different formats of content. And we've also been focusing on channel marketing or partner marketing. So working with the large vendors that rely on a lot of rely on a large indirect channel, so a lot of these MSPs and VARs and system integrators to sell their stuff. So we play or service both sides, both the large vendor in doing programs as well as working with some of these MSPs. So that's kind of our niche. And I've been there 9 years now, which is kind of weird. There's a saying that most agency owners are accidental. Totally true for me. Like I never, in grade 2, told my teacher I wanted to run a B2B marketing agency. So yeah, everyone just sort of falls into it and makes the best thing that they can.
You know, as you're working with all of your clients, what are some of the most common obstacles that you see to growth?
So the first obstacle I'm going to say is they don't have a plan for growth. There's still a lot of random acts of marketing that are happening, or a lot of good ideas, good tactical ideas that don't tie back to a business objective or a marketing objective. So I don't think you need to spend 4 months in a cave trying to come up with the big plan. I do think it requires people to like write down something that connects the dots between business objectives, business strategy, marketing objectives, marketing strategy, and then tactics. And things should flow down there. If you don't have that, you just do a bunch of random stuff that isn't really connected. It's a lot of neat experiments that aren't really going to show results because you have nothing to tie them back to. So that sounds really basic and trivial, but it still happens, especially with smaller companies. But I've seen some departments at larger companies also guilty of that. It's not just having a really sharp plan. I would say another big obstacle is not really understanding who your buyer is. So again, sounds trivial, but if you don't understand kind of what the needs are, what the pain points are, who's involved in the buying process, so it's not going to be just necessarily one person. Depending on what you sell, there may be multiple people, especially in B2B. Most purchases are a group decision. And if you don't understand who the primary people are and the secondary personas are, if you don't understand the decision criteria for all of them, where do they go for good information, for unbiased information, and then how's that decision made? So all these steps within the buying process, if you don't have a really good handle on that, and if your understanding is not consistent across your company in terms of marketing, sales, product, customer service, again, you're going to have a lot of stuff and a lot of activity created that doesn't fit back to something that your buyer cares about. So if you think about buyer personas and all the information that's contained in there, that should be the fuel for your messaging and your value prop. And that messaging and value prop is the fuel for your content, which is the fuel for your campaigns and your go-to-market strategy. So if you don't have that first step done and consistent across the board, you're going to have a lot of problems downstream. And again, like there's plenty of times where we'll ask a client, hey, can we see your personas? And they'll say, we know who our buyers are, but we don't really have anything written down. And truthfully, one or two people really do know who their buyers are, but it's not a consistent understanding across the company. So I've seen that too many times. The last thing I would say is poor execution. And we can talk about technical execution when you're talking about demand gen in terms of SEO and stuff. That's not my expertise, so I'm going to stay away from that. For me, poor execution is, does this make sense? If I was the buyer and I typed something into Google and your ad came up, and then I went to your landing page and I downloaded the asset, and then I got a follow-up email and phone call or whatever the case is, does that all make sense? Is the messaging and the experience compelling and relatable to what I'm trying to solve for? Because if I'm Googling something, I'm trying to solve a problem. I don't randomly Google business problems. I have an intent. to solve a problem or to find something out. And if that entire path you've laid out for me isn't strong, it doesn't make sense, it's not compelling, there's too many diversions, or there's just like, how did I wind up on this page? This makes no sense based on what I clicked. That to me is poor execution. It just doesn't make sense for the buyer. And if you audit your own stuff, audit it for the purpose of, does this make sense for your buyer?
Around personas, when you think of great personas, right? Something that's been really well done is actionable. What do they have, either from a process standpoint to get there or information included in that persona document that sort of average or mediocre or your typical persona is missing?
Sure. So I could riff for about an hour on this. I'll try and contain this. So let's talk about process. I've seen poor personas created without talking to customers, where you're basically interviewing the executive staff and a few salespeople, and they're giving you their perspective on who the customer is, what their care abouts are. And that is a cheap and cheerful way to get it done. And I would say you probably have 60% of your story there. So it's a good way to start. In fact, when we do personas, that's how we start. We start with all the internal interviews so that we've got really good context once we speak to external people. There's a ton of value in speaking to external people. And I would divide them into existing customers. I would divide them into closed lost. So people who are in your buying cycle, and went deep in your buying cycle, but just ultimately went with a competitor. Because those interviews, you find out why were we shortlisted, but why didn't we win? There's a ton of really good gold there if you're able to talk to someone who's going to give you some honest answers. You can even just talk to industry people. If you're trying to understand, hey, you've been in this industry for 20 years, tell me about how the industry's changed. What have you noticed? The industry consultants have a really good point of view on stuff. So even look outside your customers and prospects. So in terms of process, going back to who you talk to, I think that there's a lot to be found there. In terms of what the actual profile looks like, when it comes to B2B, nobody cares whether you drink Starbucks or Tim Hortons. That's not going to impact anyone's buying decision. So I would get rid of a lot of that type of sort of personal preference criteria, because it doesn't contribute to the buying decision, and it's not data that's in your database. You can't action that. That's a good thing for the salesperson to know, so when they go to a meeting, they can bring Timmy's or Starbucks, but it's not persona worthy. I would say it's understanding having some bullets around what are the key priorities in that person's job title or in that role. What triggers a buying cycle? So what actually caused enough pain that they said, all right, it's time to fix this problem. When they're solving the problem, what are the questions they're asking based on the needs that they have? When they come to making a decision, what are the decision criteria? What else would I put in there? Oh yeah, watering holes. Where do they hang out? So where are the places, if you're going to try and speak to these people, target them, where do they go? What LinkedIn groups are they part of? What associations are they part of? What do they read? If you're going to do content syndication, are they going to care about that kind of stuff? So really, watering holes is just a nice term of where do they go to learn? And then even content, because at the end of the day, you're going to do personas because ultimately you're going to create content to reach out to them. What sort of content would actually matter to them? What are the topics that they want to cover or interest of them? And then we always try and include verbatims. So I always find personas are really powerful when you've got one or two direct quotes from one of the people you've interviewed. And it's amazing how many times we presented a persona slide and a very senior person in the room says, like, I know that person, in the sense like that statement like resonated with them. Or they'll say, holy crap, I can't believe so-and-so said this, because it just makes them look at it in a different way. So having a couple of verbatims that are meant to kind of provoke thought are absolutely worthwhile as well.
So one of my other questions here. So, presumably in the course of working with a lot of your customers and your clients, You will bring third-party solutions to them. You'll recommend vendors. When you are looking to partner with a vendor, what are you looking for? What does a great vendor relationship look like? To the point where you're going to recommend them to your clients and suggest that they leverage them.
So I think there's a couple of ways I think about this. One is selfishly as a business owner, and then one is from the client's perspective. So from the client's perspective, I think there has to be some table stakes stuff, right? It has to be easy to use. So if it's software, like you want something that's intuitive, very, very sort of simple to navigate, easy to use, has all the features and functions you would expect. It doesn't have to be the best of in terms of features and functions, but in terms of the use cases we're trying to solve for, it needs to be very competent. Are there reference clients? So I would look to, like when I'm auditing or interviewing potential vendors, like who are your reference clients that look like me or my clients? So have you solved this use case that I've got or my clients have, and can you demonstrate that? Or can I talk to a few customers that can prove that? Is your pricing reasonable? So I don't necessarily care about cheapest, but it needs to be reasonable. If I'm going to recommend something to a client, I can't, depending on what their budgets are and who they are, I'm going to look like an idiot if something is 2x more than the average. And if it is 2x more, then I have to justify that. What does support look like, both for us and for our customer? So all those things I've listed, I think, are kind of table stakes. And then reputation and all that stuff as well. As a business owner, this one kind of still sticks with me because I experienced this. We worked with a partner once that made it hard to work with them because I had to take a bit of a risk up front in terms of purchasing licenses and then selling them afterwards. So basically, it was a model where I could buy 5 licenses that I think would last for a year, and I could sell the 5 and resell them and make margin on them, but I had to pay up front. So it wasn't even like a reasonable payment plan. I had to take a financial risk up front and then try and actively sell. Selling partner stuff isn't my core business. So I'm not a salesperson for my vendor, right? We're supposed to be partners here. So to me, that's just not partnership. My job is to bring clients and recommend good technology or good partners that they should be working with. But if I have to take a financial risk or any kind of risk up front for that to happen, that's a non-starter for me nowadays. So I would look at a partner. My question is, okay, what do the first 3 months look like, and how do I work with you? If I've got a client opportunity, what does that look like? If I want my team to be onboarded and trained so we're competent in this tool, what does that look like, and what's it going to cost me? So that's definitely a big part now of my evaluation process.
So the next one is, how do you see your role as an agency evolving over the next, whatever it might be, 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah. We're a small agency, so I'm going to just speak in that context. I think the answer may differ if you talk to a behemoth. But we're a smaller agency. So for us, we've made a decision to specialize, and I think we'll just further specialize potentially, right? So we work in technology, B2B, technology and financial services, and we do a lot around channel marketing. That's a pretty sort of direct stream, but there's a lot of potential opportunity there for us to become really good experts, and there's a large enough total addressable market where that makes sense for us. I have an issue with small agencies calling themselves full service agencies. And we are guilty of that. We've called ourselves full service. I have PowerPoint decks that claimed we were full service. The reality is, though, if you're that small, you cannot be above average in everything that has to do with B2B marketing. It's just not possible. There's too much out there and too much available for you to do nowadays that I don't think it's reasonable that a small agency can be a powerhouse in everything. So I think really sort of identifying what you do well and doubling down on that and expertise, I think that's the way agencies are going to go. The agencies that don't, I don't think will just do well, because I also think clients now are looking, there are some clients that want one agency to take care of everything, and that's fine. And if they ask us to do that, we'll bring in partners to fill in the gaps where we can't do it ourselves. But I also know that, like, I've seen clients wanting us for a specific skill set or a specific knowledge or project, and that's our sweet spot. And so if it is our sweet spot, I'm happy to do that. I can, this whole sort of thing of specialization, and it's not only applicable to agencies. I think that's just happening in general with small business. I see that happening a lot. I do think that the role that we play as advisors to our clients is still going to be really prominent for the good agencies. The reason that an agency gets hired and then retained is because they're adding either just outstanding executional value, or they're offering really good strategy, really good execution, really understand the business, super empathetic towards the agency client plus the agency client's customers. And that whole, if you've got that sort of understanding of everything and you can bring new ideas that are going to solve problems, I think that's always going to keep you in business. So that's kind of what we always want to be involved in strategy and bringing good ideas. So everything I've ever read in my agency groups, we talk about that all the time, is how do we continue to add value from bringing fresh ideas to our clients. Just going back on the execution point, like average execution is really cheap nowadays. You can find any freelancer in any part of the world who has taken a course from HubSpot or has got Google training and can legitimately claim themselves to be a digital marketer. And they can probably get some good stuff done. So average execution is, I think, is a commodity. So going back to why to specialize, it requires you to be well above average.
Last one for anybody that is interested in learning more about specifically B2B marketing, demand generation, revenue generation. Any books or resources, if you had to point to one, you would recommend people dive into?
Yeah, so some people that I think are worth following and reading their stuff, Seth Godin, anything by Seth Godin. It's not necessarily B2B specific, but his books are always very good reads. Anne Hanley, so she has a big focus on content. One of her books that I read was Everyone Writes, which I think is a highly underrated skill. I think every B2B marketer should know how to write and write compelling content. April Dunford, who's a fellow Canadian, she's done, her specialization is on messaging and positioning. I cannot remember the name of her book, but I know she published one that I have on my Kindle that I've read, and it's excellent. So it really kind of spells out messaging and positioning and the differences between the two. One book that's on my bookshelf, I'm not sure if you can read this, Duct Tape Marketing. I think this is really good for small businesses, but there's some really good principles in here. I met this guy, John Jantz, who wrote it at a conference, and super nice guy. He's been in business for a long, long time. But the book itself, I thought, was really some really good tactical ideas. And so depending on what you're looking for, like some of the people I mentioned, I think are sometimes a little more strategic, but there's also a lot of good tactical stuff out there. In terms of conferences I go to, B2BMX, which happened in late February. It was the last flight I took before COVID from Phoenix. That was a really good one. The Forrester Serious Decisions conferences are always pretty good. It's weird. The conferences have like escaped my mind just because I haven't been on a plane now for a few months. Slack groups actually are now becoming an interesting resource as well. I joined one called Online Geniuses, which is not B2B specific, but it's more about digital marketing. And it's crazy how many people are on that, how many, like the channels are really organized quite well. Actually, one of my clients sort of told me he was starting to learn from Slack, which is what got me searching for outside Slack channels. And yeah, Online Geniuses is quite good.
Awesome. That's great. That's super helpful. I appreciate this. This is great.
It was fun.